Hello and welcome to Nat Chat. Today our guest is David Hogg, who is a social worker, and he worked as an aid assistant in Africa, and he also works at Independence Australia as a social worker. Welcome to the program, David.
Thank you very much.
Now let's start with talking about your experience in Africa. This is you were in the middle of studies and then you decided to take a year off and work as an aid.
Yeah, well, my little sister was working at a school over there, and she organised an orphanage for me to come and work at. It was a really great opportunity. I had a psychologist there who was supervising me, and we got to work with children in child trauma therapy, and also do some bigger development work, especially with nutrition.
Oh, wow. And so what sort of work did you do, say, for example, with the children, with the psychologist? What did they train you in?
Well, I had a lot of kids that were really traumatised, especially from extreme domestic violence. There were some kids that had to fend for themselves at age 4 or 5. With no home, find...
Really? No homes at 4 or 5 years old?
Yeah, find, trees or abandoned houses to live in, and have to steal food to survive.
Oh
and
my gosh.
And a lot of them got caught stealing food before they were brought to the orphanage that I was working at. So there was quite a stigma around them, that a story that they told about themselves, that they were these bad children, and also there was also a stigma in the communities with them thinking, well, we've heard about these children that are stealing a lot. Well, what will they steal next? What will they do next?
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So
it circulated a lot of fear about these poor little children that had. Oh, that's terrible. Just trying to fend for themselves.
Yeah, and so me and the psychologist worked to kind of re-author the story that they told about themselves, and to help foster attachment with the community that they were living in. So, for example, I played this game with one of the kids as primary carer, and it was called The Sneak and the Detective, and the kid had to do 3 things to really impress his carer during the week, and she would get a reward if she was able to pick correctly what those 3 things were that he was doing. And when we met at the end of the week, she came with this list of 20 or 30 positive things, and read them all. Oh, I noticed that you were helping wash up. I noticed you were helping look after the kids. Was it that? And so he just felt over the moon, because he'd never had so much positive feedback about it. And also for him, his role for that whole week was, secretly doing these 3 things that were positive for his carer to impress her and things like that. So it was really about changing the narrative that he told about himself, and changing the way that people looked at him and searched for what was coming next with him.
That's so beautiful. Yeah. What a beautiful story. That's really so gorgeous. Let's see, there's a way around it, isn't it? It's like, that's why social working is such a good skill to have, because you're really working with people and finding out why they behave that way. It's not just cut and dry like some people might think.
Yeah. People always come with pasts, and some people are luckier than others. Some people don't have the role models that others do. Some people don't have that primary attachment figure, that core that builds up inside them. But as a social worker, our job is to hold unlimited positive regard to, no matter what situation it is, to look for the strength, look for the attributes that really show that that the person is a strong, tenacious person. So, for example, with these kids, the act of stealing food could be seen in the community as a really bad thing. I would see it as being, really creative, really resilient, to not just give up, but to find a way to survive, to find a way to support his sister, to do the basic human instinct of looking after his family.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. And what else did you see there in Africa? What was the living conditions like for you there?
For me, it was pretty good because Malawi, which is the country I was in, really treats its guests like celebrities. So there's a certain amount of dignity that comes with hosting a guest from a different country and being able to tell other people when they visit, oh, it was only a couple of months ago that I had a Westerner here and I had them stay and I gave them my best chicken and things like that. So they really enjoyed doing things like that. For them, the average wage was under $1 a day. So it was quite humbling walking into people's houses because if they owned a house, it would generally be made of mud brick, and inside the house would generally be a pot or pan, and potentially a pillow, and that's it inside the house.
Gee,
yeah,
very empty.
Yeah, exactly. Nice. Not so much problems with, you know, needing to clean up or get rid of things every so often, but
and beds, did they have did you
sometimes
sleep in a decent bed?
They had beds. If there was beds, it would be really common to for them to share beds. 3 or 4 people to sleep in the same bed.
Gee. And were they working in these houses? These people you visited and worked with, were any of them working?
Yeah, the vast majority of people in Africa were working, mainly in manual labour, mainly farming, doing that sort of stuff. There was a real problem that the generation above, a lot of them died from HIV and AIDS, and so left their children quite young. This created, a lack of funds to send them to schooling. And so we ended up with quite an uneducated generation of youth. So, so charities and the government were really honing in on let's educate these people, let's send them through school, especially women, to give them the chance to get through to year 12 so that if they did end up in a bad situation, they had their education to fall back on. And the problem was, though, is that they would graduate and the market wasn't there to provide them with a plethora of jobs. There wasn't all this accounting jobs, there wasn't all these architecture jobs, there was, for the most part, just farming for them to go into. Okay.
We'll have to go to a break now.
Yeah.
You're watching Nat Chat. Stay with us. We'll be back with more very shortly. Hello and welcome back to Nat Chat. I'm Mirella Rich. If you've just joined us, we're here with David Hogg, who worked for a year as an aid worker in Africa. He's telling us his experience, and he's also worked as a social worker, which is what he's doing now, aren't you?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit more about the nutrition side of things in Africa. You said you worked with a nutritionist there.
Yeah, I worked for an agency called Lucibilo Orphan Care, and Lucibilo had won the world's best charity award because of its practices in terms of its grassroots practices. So it was able to look after 60 or 70,000 people with only a budget of $2 to $3 million a year. Right. So this is 60 to 70,000 people that are spread out in very rural communities, many kilometres apart, that you'd need to drive people out to see them. You might be able to see 2 villages in a day out of your 70 that you're assisting. So we had the problem of only having one nutritionist. So their core belief was to always empower the people, to give the people ownership over projects and let them develop their own communities themselves. So I worked with the nutritionist to go out to communities, and we would create nutritional experts. Great. So the chief or members of the community would come forward, and say 10 or 12 of them would come forward and learn about 30 or 40 really key essential nutritional facts that could save lives. Facts around breastfeeding, facts around treating wounds, around nutrition, those sort of things. And they would all receive books to do to expand that knowledge.
Yeah.
So these people would become the nutritional experts in their community. So they would go out and teach like 20 other people each, and would be the people would come to with questions, and then they'd be able to feed them back up to us. So within a few years of this program running, we had thousands of these nutritional experts within the communities, and we found because they took on that role of being the nutritional expert, they were able to keep reinforcing those messages. They were able to keep spreading that word a lot better than us going in there and speaking for half an hour once every year or two.
Wow, that's so beautiful.
Yeah, it was really empowering and amazing to see.
And did you see much change after this
Well,
project?
they actually, even more efficiently, they became basic researchers. So they took data on infant mortality, on how long people were breastfeeding for if we introduced different nutritional programs, whether they were working and things like that. And so we were able to collect data without paying anyone to do it, because the communities themselves took it over and really wanted those sort of changes to already happen.
Beautiful.
Something else really cool that they used to do is that it wasn't the model of here's some poor people, let's go save them. It was the model of here's a community that's strong, that knows what it wants.
That's so beautiful. Different attitude.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
so it's not patronising.
Absolutely. And so we would meet with them, and they would say, you know, what we want is a community centre. And the reason we want it is we want to be able to have town meetings, we want to be able to have someone to trade, we want to have like somewhere we can go to teach the kids, different sort of programs. And so we would say, okay, what's stopping you from doing that? And they would just say, you know, we don't have the money to do it. So instead of us going in there and building them a community centre, we would say, okay, you organise all of the workers, you get everyone that's interested in this project to come, and we'll drop off the bricks and the cement, and we can help teach you how to build it if you don't know how. Otherwise, if you know how, we'll see you later. And what ended up happening is they would come there as a community, and they would build these centres themselves, and they'd paint them themselves, and they would totally own them.
Yeah.
And so when you went out into the community, it wasn't something that someone had come in and built. It was something that they owned as a community. It was their spot. And sometimes you'd have to book in times, you know, when are you not trading? When can we interrupt, you know, this meeting to have a chat with you and stuff like that. And it became such an amazing distribution network that was so efficient and cheap and way more empowering. For example, we wanted to distribute 10,000 mosquito nets because something as simple as a mosquito bite was killing people in these communities.
Wow.
And instead of going to the homes and dropping off mosquito nets and trying to work out who needed them and who didn't, we would just drop them off to these community centres that people themselves had built. And then the leaders of the community would meet and discuss who really needed them, and, you know, who had kids and that sort of stuff. And they would take them all out into the communities.
Oh, so good. That's so good.
Yeah.
So good
so
to hear it like that.
inspiring.
Yeah, it's done in such a normal, humane
Exactly.
way, you know,
Yeah.
just helping another human being
That's
to find
right.
their feet, and
Yep.
look at them when they fly, you know. It's
Exactly.
great.
See them with strength, see them with capacity, and let them own their projects themselves.
Wonderful. What a great job.
Yeah.
So how was
really
your
good.
experience? Like, how would you, you know, talk about your experience now for being there for a year? What was it personally like for you, would you say?
I think Africa was the people were the happiest I've ever seen. Obviously, there was, you know, risks to within the culture because they didn't have the healthcare that they needed. Some of them didn't have the educational means to get out of quite risky, say, domestic violence situations and things like that. But as a whole, they were so collectivist and so willing to help each other that they had such bonds between each other, and they were so happy that they would just laugh, they would hold your hands down the street, they would sing with you, they would invite you into ceremonies with them and dance around, and they would show you things that they've built and stories about their past. And yeah,
such really open people.
Absolutely, really loving, beautiful, and you feel so safe, even though there was some really extreme crime going on. The way the people treated you was so respectful and so loving that you felt more safe there than you do perhaps in a Western country.
That is so beautiful, wonderful. We have to go to a break now. You're watching Nat Chat. Stay with us. We'll be back with more very shortly. Hello and welcome to Nat Chat. I'm Morella Rich. If you've just joined us, we're here with David Hogg, who is a social worker and worked as an aid worker in Africa. Welcome back to the program, David.
Thanks, Morella.
Now, while you were in Africa, did you have any kind of near-death experiences or any dramatic experiences or huge adventures?
Yes. So Africa is an incredibly raw, rich experience. There's nothing that's, half felt in Africa. It's either life or death or nothing at all. And we were one day on a minibus. It's a 10-seater. There was about 25 of us in the minibus. There was 2 bags of fish on top of the roof. There was a goat and a few chickens inside. Yeah. And so we're going along at 150 kilometres an hour. We've just entered into this national park, where there's lions and cheetahs and whatnot that roam around. And the wheels come off the front of the bus. And so the bus screeches to the ground and scrapes through the road and luckily doesn't flip. And somehow we're all packed in like sardines, including the goat. And somehow, even though this man crawls over all of our heads and screams, "Only God can save us now," as the bus crashes. And so there we were.
You're all screaming?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And so we get off the bus and the bus driver says, I'll be back in half an hour with another bus. So
I'll be back. So did he walk off?
He had a friend come and pick him up in a car, and he said, "Don't worry, everyone, we'll wait here." So 7 hours it took him to get back there. So 7 hours we're sitting huddled by this tree inside this national park, hoping that no lions, anything come across, And we ended up getting there he brought back a flatbed truck, and we'd bounce in the back of it with hay bales and things like that. It was like 3 a.m. by the time that he got back there, so it was swerved to try not to hit like a hippopotamus that's crossing the road or things like that. Until we finally got into our national park accommodation. And in the accommodation, we were just in this tent. It was quite hot, so we took off the cover for the tent so it was see-through. We heard like a slight amount of rumbling, and we were like, "Wonder what that noise is." So we got up, and sure enough, it was a stampede of African elephants running at our tent. And the advice we've been given is, if they're charging at you and you're inside something, they'll think it's an object. So stay as still as you can. Oh my gosh. These elephants came through and knocked over caravans and trampled other tents. And luckily, we just stood as still as possible. Oh my gosh. And luckily we were unharmed.
Well, that's lucky, because if they did they knocked over caravans and other tents, why not yours?
We weren't feeling too sure about the advice that we've been given anymore. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. How freaky.
I know, yeah. And there was... So my little sister got malaria when she was in Malawi.
That's right, you were saying off camera.
She got a temperature of 42 degrees and had to rush her to the hospital, and that was a real eye-opener about the conditions that people live in, even if they're able to get to a hospital.
Yeah.
The hospital itself didn't have any ability to run blood tests. They only really had general antibiotics, and they gave her, I think it was penicillin, and just crossed their fingers that that was the right thing that was going on. And luckily it was the right thing that was going on.
Gee, that's good. So that's the risk you're both taking when you go there. You don't know if you're going to get malaria or something, do you?
Well, that's right. And the thing is that you don't go to Africa for a bland experience. You go there for the richness and the rawness of that pure happiness of the kids, seeing of the communities coming together and things like that. But then there is also that risk factor of, you know, there is a lot of diseases there. There is a lot of, you can get malaria quite easily. Yeah. And you might see some pretty confronting things along the way.
Yeah, it's quite a courageous thing to do, really, isn't it?
Thank you.
Gosh, that's so amazing. And you also had an accident, but that was nothing to do with, you know, diseases or anything.
That was in this paradise island called Zanzibar, which is pure white silk sand, and it's like the Maldives of Africa. You can see coral reef 9 meters deep, and it's perfectly clear, and you go out on boats. And so you go scuba diving there. Yeah. And I didn't actually realise that there was real risks with scuba diving. That if you came up too quickly and didn't breathe out, the oxygen had to push out of your lungs into somewhere. And for me, it went to my brain and caused me to lose my ability to see and speak and walk for quite some time.
This was when you were during scuba diving?
Yeah, so this is when I came up too quickly, it pushed the air and it caused a blockage, kind of like a stroke. Now, I was exceptionally lucky because here am I in Tanzania, an island. There's only 2 hyperbaric chambers in the continent that I can possibly get to. I'm not allowed to fly. If I fly, it'll be instant death because of it'll move the air bubble with the pressurized cabin. And I need to be treated within the next 2 to 3 hours, otherwise I'll be permanently disabled.
Wow.
Now, luckily, I was having breakfast with a dive master, just happened to be at this $3 accommodation. And she said, I think you should go ask one of the diving people. And the diving person happened to be one of 2 people in the country that was trained in the exact problem that I was having. And she ran these neurological tests. And she knew of a Western doctor that was on the island that did his PhD in diving accidents. So he was able to treat me. It cost my insurance company over $50,000 in treatment. Okay. So I was really lucky to have travel insurance direct insuring me. Okay. But yeah, it was a scary experience, but I'm 100% recovery because of hyperbaric treatment.
Because you couldn't walk at one point, couldn't you?
Yeah, so totally lost my ability to walk, which is the strangest experience to forget how the movement of a foot goes, how... Yeah.
Well, we'll have to get you back on again. Would you like to come and go again next week?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Lovely. You've been watching Nat Chat. I'm Mirella Rich and our guest was David Hogg. See you again next week.